13 main set. Oligopoly is a market structure in which there are only a few sellers. Which of the following markets can most accurately be described as monopolistically competitive? Toothpaste. The model of monopolistic competition differs from the model of perfect competition in which of the following assumptions? Product homogeneity. Excess capacity for a firm in an oligopoly situation is a deterrent to entry in the market by potential competitors. In the Cournot model, each firm takes the quantities produced by its rivals as given. In the Bertrand model, each firm takes the prices charged by its rivals as given. In the Stackelberg model, one firm plays a leadership role and its rivals merely react to the leader's quantity. The oligopoly model, in which each firm assumes that rivals will continue to produce at their current output levels, is called the Cournot model. The basic idea of the theory of contestable markets is that when the cost of entry and exit is very low, the threat of entry can be sufficient to produce an allocation similar to the one we see under perfect competition. When marginal cost is constant and zero, the interdependence between Cournot duopolists causes price to be 1/3 lower and quantity to be 1/3 higher than the corresponding values in the monopoly case. Cournot duopolists face a market demand curve given by P equals 90 Q. The equilibrium price and quantity for the total market will be Q equals 40, P equals 50. Bertrand duopolists face a market demand curve given by P equals 90 Q. The equilibrium price and quantity for the total market will be Q equals 60, P equals 30. Stackelberg leader-follower duopolists face a market demand curve given by P equals 90 Q, where Q is total market demand. The equilibrium price and quantity for the total market will be Q equals 45, P equals 45. Cournot duopolists face a market demand curve given by P equals 90 Q, where Q is total market demand. If the duopolists behave as a shared monopoly, the equilibrium price and total quantity of output will be Q equals 30, P equals 60. Prices in the Bertrand model are the same as prices would be in the perfectly competitive case. The strategy for the Bertrand model is to sell at a marginally lower price than the rival but not below marginal cost. The strategy for the Stackelberg leader is to take account of the effect of its own behavior on the rival firm's quantity choice. The strategy for the shared monopoly is collusion. Which of the duopoly models has the highest overall combined profit level? The shared monopoly model. The basic problem of a shared monopoly from the point of view of those involved is that collusive agreements are difficult to sustain. Which of the duopoly models has the lowest overall combined profit level? The Bertrand model. In the long run, a monopolistically competitive firm acting according to the Chamberlain model will not operate at the minimum point of the average cost curve. Which of the following is an application of the hodling model of monopolistic competition? Stores of similar types tend to cluster. The variety that monopolistic competition provides is paid primarily by those customers who desire the variety. Suppose that firms are located in a circle on an island. As transportation costs on the island rise, the number of firms will rise in the long run. Suppose that firms are located in a circle on an island. As the firm's variable costs rise, the number of firms will stay the same in the long run. Suppose that firms are located in a circle on an island. As the firm's fixed costs increase, the number of firms will fall in the long run. Suppose that firms are located in a circle on an island. As the number of customers increase, the number of firms will rise in the long run. Suppose that firms are located in a circle on an island. If the distance around the island is 50 miles and there are 2 restaurants equally spaced on the island and each of 100 people are equally spaced around the island and eat a meal a day at a restaurant, What will be the average distance traveled to and from restaurants in a day's time? 12.5 miles. Suppose that firms are located in a circle on an island. In an example of restaurant location on an island, if the number of people on the island doubled, the number of restaurants would increase by a factor of square root of 2. If a monopolistically competitive firm is making positive economic profits, we would expect entry of other firms. Suppose that two firms are producers of spring water, which can be obtained at zero cost. The market demand curve for their combined output is P equals 100 Q, where P is the price and Q is the amount of spring water sold by both together. If the two producers act in accord with the Cournot model, their combined output will be 66.66. Suppose there are two firms in a market, Firm A and Firm B. Further, assume that they produce a homogeneous product at a constant marginal cost of $10. In the Bertrand model solution, Firm A will charge a price equal to $10. The Chamberlain model has been criticized for all but which one of the following reasons? The model predicts no long-run profits but does not account for entry and exit in markets. Which statement is true about advertising? Advertising is most useful if it is spent on new products of good quality. When you go to a baseball game, your ticket specifies your seat and section of the stadium where the seat is located. Assuming the seats all cost nearly the same to install and maintain, what pricing strategy would you expect the team officials to adopt if a full stadium with a maximum of satisfied customers and at least normal profit is the goal? Price above cost for seats with the best view and below cost for less desirable seats, so the gain from those willing to pay more for the best seats offsets the loss on the cheap seats. 13. Alternative set. One who follows the Cournot duopoly strategy assumes that competing firms treat each other's quantity as fixed when making an output decision. In a Cournot duopoly model, one characteristic of the equilibrium position is that both firms produce the same amount of output. When a deep recession hits an economy and an oligopoly industry like the auto industry, what happens to the reaction curves of these oligopoly firms? They shift to the left. Which oligopoly model would be most desirable from the point of view of the consumer? Bertrand. A weakness of the Stackelberg model is that one firm behaves strategically while the other behaves naively. Which is true of the Stackelberg leader in the Stackelberg model? It produces more output than the Stackelberg follower. Which of the following is most likely to be both a fixed and a sunk cost of your auto repair business? The prescription safety glasses you wear while welding. In the Chamberlain model, products in an industry under consideration are considered to be close substitutes by consumers. Which is not a criticism of the Chamberlain model. It assumes that entry is easy but exit is difficult for the firms. Which of the following does not act as a doomsday device? A student promising not to cheat on a take-home test. In a spatial model of monopolistic competition, the transportation cost share of the product cost increases when fewer evenly spaced vendor locations are offered. Beginning from a base of one vendor, the optimal number of vendor locations is reached when the blank in the transportation cost per unit of product exactly equals the blank in the production cost per unit of product. Fall, rise. As transportation costs fall, we can expect the optimal number of vendors to be reduced. If economies of scale are more substantial than originally thought, the optimal number of vendors will be smaller than originally thought. Which statement is true? The optimal number of vendors will be greater, other things being equal, the less dense the population of the area involved. An island has a 100-mile road around its perimeter and there are 10 restaurants located equidistant from each other on the road. What is the average round-trip mileage that each customer will have to travel for a restaurant meal? Assume the people are located equidistant from each other on the island road. 2.5 miles. If each product had only one quality or characteristic that mattered to consumers, the monopolistic competition models would be more like the competitive models of an earlier chapter. The revised sequence concept implies that products that might fail under the traditional sequence might now be successful. The cost of variety tends to be borne more heavily by those who desire the variety. Which of the following is not a true statement about oligopoly and monopolistic competition? The tit-for-tat strategy applies to both market forms. Which of the following products is most likely to fit the oligopoly models? Rolled steel. Which of the following monopolistic competition and oligopoly models results in larger market output than the perfect competition model? None of the above. 14 main set. The value of the marginal product of labor, VMPL, for the perfectly competitive firm equals the extra revenue the firm gets by selling the output of one additional unit of labor. The hiring rule for the perfect competitor in the labor market is to choose that amount of labor for which the wage rate is exactly equal to the value of the marginal product of labor, VMPL. In the short run, a profit-maximizing firm will respond to a reduction in the wage rate by hiring more labor. If the marginal product of the fifth person employed is 10 and the product price is $5, then the VMPL is $50 if the product market is perfectly competitive. Say a firm that sells its product at a price of $20 is using 20 units of labor. If the marginal product of the last unit of labor hired was 10, and the firm pays each worker a wage of $40, then this firm should hire more workers. The demand for labor curve will be less elastic for the industry than for the firm because if all firms hire more labor, increased output will lower product price and therefore the marginal revenue product curve. Which of the following labor demand curves will be the least elastic? The short-run demand for labor of a firm with L-shaped isequence. The market demand for labor is steeper than the horizontal summation of the individual demand curves. The market demand for labor is more elastic in the long run than in the short run. Economic theory supports the view that increasing the minimum wage will decrease the employment of teenagers. The hiring rule for a firm that faces a downward-sloping demand curve for its output is to hire that amount of labor for which the wage rate is equal to MRPL. If the MRPL is greater than the wage rate, and the supply of labor is horizontal, the firm will hire more labor. For the monopolist, diminishing returns to production and a falling product price as output increases causes the short-run demand curve for labor to be downward sloping. Say a worker sees work and leisure as perfect complements with a ratio of 5:1, requiring 1 hour of leisure for every $5 in income. If this worker earned a wage of $10, her optimal demand for leisure would be 16. The backward-bending portion of the labor supply curve implies that higher wages lead to fewer hours of work supplied. The upward-sloping portion of the supply curve for labor implies that higher wages lead to an increase in hours of work supplied. The substitution effect of an increase in the wage rate on the quantity of leisure demanded makes leisure more expensive, which leads people to work more. The income effect of an increase in the wage rate on the quantity of leisure demanded gives people more purchasing power and causes people to work less. We see a backward-bending labor supply curve whenever the income effect dominates the substitution effect over some range of wage rates. The market supply curve for any particular category of labor is likely to be upward sloping. A monopsonist is a firm which is a sole buyer in an input market. The optimal level of employment for a monopsonist is set at the point where the marginal factor cost equal to the MRPL. Because the monopsonist takes into account the effect that employment expansion has on wages paid to existing workers, it will employ less and pay less than the corresponding values under competition. The competitive labor market model suggests that the persistence of significant employer discrimination requires the owners of the firm to supply capital at a rate of return below what could be earned elsewhere. If minimum wages in a monopsony labor market are set above the firm's MFC at its initial hiring level, the effect would be to reduce employment. Proponents of the minimum wage implicitly assume that the blank, if they discount the unemployment effects of the policy. Demand curve for unskilled workers is inelastic. Opponents of the minimum wage law implicitly assume that the blank, if they worry about the unemployment effects of the policy. Demand curve for unskilled workers is highly elastic. When an employer's information indicates that two individuals have exactly the same productivity, there will be competitive pressure to pay higher wages to the person who belongs to the group with the higher average productivity. In general, when a test is less than accurate, our best estimate of a worker's productivity will lie between his actual test score and the average productivity of the group to which he belongs. Suppose workers from Group A have an average productivity of $15 per hour and that employers have a productivity test that is 100% accurate 1/3 of the time, but has no value 2/3 of the time. What is the best estimate of the VMP of a worker from Group A with a test score of $21 per hour? $17. Imagine that there is a group of workers, Group B, which has an average productivity of $9 per hour. Suppose workers from Group A have an average productivity of $15 per hour and that employers have a productivity test that is 100% accurate 1/3 of the time, but has no value 2/3 of the time. If a worker from Group B took the same productivity test that was given to workers in Group A, what is the best estimate of the VMP for this worker if his test score is $21 per hour? A. $13. B. $18. C. $17. D. $21. Which of the equilibrium points on the leisure income graph below has a wage rate of $4 per hour? C. Which of the following two statements is true of the graph shown below? Statement 1. The graph leads to a supply of labor curve that is positively sloped throughout. Statement 2. The opportunity cost of leisure is lower at point A than at point D. Statement 2. Which phrase finishes this statement best? The net effect of a union increasing wages is to misallocate labor toward non-union work unless unionization enhances union worker productivity by its actions. Pay rates within a firm seem to show less variation than marginal productivity rate differences. This is because firms compensate their high producers with non-monetary perks. Why is it difficult to get a cab on a rainy day? Cab drivers have backward-bending daily supply curve. Appendix. If relative income standing and job safety both matter, then a prisoner dilemma problem may result where optimality requires collusion or a law requiring cooperation. If an additional worker costs you $15 per hour and can add 10 units per hour of output to the firm, you should hire that person as long as the product price is at least $1.50. Which of the following would cause the demand curve for automobile workers to increase? A better organized assembly line where specialization increased output. If 9 units of labor will be supplied if the wage rate is $12 and 10 units of labor will be supplied if the wage rate is $14, then the marginal factor cost for the 10th unit of labor is more than $14. The diagram below shows the labor market faced by monopsonists. To maximize profits, this firm will hire labor at point L1. The competitive labor market model suggests that persistence of significant employer discrimination requires the owners of the firm to supply capital at a rate of return substantially below its opportunity cost. According to the textbook, proponents of minimum wage laws assume that the demand curve for unskilled workers is nearly vertical. Which of the following is true about labor union effects on labor markets? Approximately 90% of the wage difference between union and non-union workers is due to the higher quality of union workers. The same labor market forces that other firms face. The marginal factor cost of the third laborer is blank if the labor supply curve faced by a firm has the following wage quantity coordinates. 25. Which of the following possible points on a labor supply curve is consistent with the income-leisure trade-off graph below? Wage equals 1, hours worked equals 12. If Alex seeks to maintain a constant income level, and all workers in his industry, including Alex, get a wage increase, which of the following will always be true? Alex will have a backward-bending supply curve for his labor. If the value of your marginal product is 100 and you are being paid 80, which of the following is the most plausible reason that you remain with the firm? You value the high rank and leadership role as well as the salary that your position offers. The theory of internal wage structure predicts that worker pay will come closest to the value of their marginal product if their work allows them to do most of their work at home. 14. Alternative set. The demand curve for labor, the only variable input, is negatively sloped because of diminishing marginal productivity. Under perfect competition, the supply of an input to an individual firm is perfectly elastic. In a typical labor market, the MRPL will be equal to the VMPL if the product market is perfectly competitive. The demand for labor curve will be more elastic for the firm than for the industry because if all firms hire more labor, increased output will lower product price and therefore make the marginal revenue product curve more inelastic. If an individual firm sells its product in a perfectly competitive market and hires labor in a perfectly competitive labor market, then the firm's supply of labor will be horizontal at the going wage. If the marginal product of the fifth person employed is 15 and the product price is $10, then the VMPL is $150 if the product market is perfectly competitive. If the marginal product of the fifth person employed is 5 making the total product 45 and the product demand curve is P equals 100Q, then the amount you would be willing to pay for this fifth worker is 75. The labor supply curve for a worker seeking a constant target level of income is negatively sloped throughout. The labor supply curve for an individual category of labor will almost certainly be positively sloped. Questions 10-12 relate to the graph below. Which of the equilibrium points on the graph has a wage rate of $6 per hour? C. Which statement is true of the graph above? The opportunity cost of leisure is lower at point A than at point D. The supply of labor curve derived from the graph above if clearly backward bending between the points labeled C and D. If you hire me at $10 an hour, but have to pay $12 an hour to attract a second laborer to work with me, I will feel unfairly treated and will quit working for you. You then will have only one worker anyway, so you might as well have kept me at $10 an hour. To prevent this problem, you hire us both at $12 each. This means that your marginal factor cost, MFC, for a second worker is $14. A profit-maximizing monopsonist will pay his labor a wage lower than the marginal factor cost of labor. It is unlikely that many clear-cut examples of monopsonistic exploitation exist in the real world because all the above are true. If all economists are equally skilled and trained, they all either consult for business or teach in academic institutions, and business firms pay an average of $110,000 per year to economists, then we would expect academic economists to make $110,000 a year also if the jobs are equally desirable and have similar perks. The bad effects of which of the following types of discrimination are most likely to be solved with legislation? Customer discrimination. Statistical discrimination requires that a person be evaluated and paid at the mean of a normal distribution of a group. A job applicant scored a 70 on a skills test where the average is 50. However, the test is correct only 1 time in 10. In 9 times out of 10 it measures nothing. Given this information and knowing that you pay a daily wage equal to the skill level of your workers, what daily wage will you give this applicant? $52. Which of the following is not statistical discrimination? I get paid what my real productivity warrants, but my pay is lower than the average of my peer group. According to traditional theory, labor union activity tends to redistribute income from non-union to union labor but also cause a net loss in income in the economy. A minimum wage law would make workers better off as a group if it were put into effect where both A and B were present. The high wages of superstars, compared with the wages of those almost as good, are the result of the public's high demand for the best and low demand for the average performance. Firms often have a flattened pay schedule where those in the high productivity group get paid a salary below their marginal product while those at the bottom of the pay scale get more than their marginal productivity. According to your text, this is possible because the marginal productivity of highly paid workers is harder to calculate with precision. Many people are concerned that the minimum wage is too low. They claim that a higher wage would reduce the number below the poverty level and not cause many existing workers to lose their jobs. This argument assumes that the labor demand curve is very inelastic at low wage rates. In the minimum wage debate described in question 25 above, some argue that the unemployment rate will rise even if no one is laid off from work due to the increased minimum wage. This argument assumes that the labor supply curve is positively sloped, but not vertical. Appendix, which statement is false? Increasing the safety requirements in mines leads to lower utility when relative income standing is not a factor. 15 main set. A cash register at a coffee shop should be considered real capital. Say a firm that sells its product at a price of $40 is using 20 units of capital. If the marginal product of the last unit of capital used was 50, and the constant rental rate of capital is $2,000, then this firm should continue to use same units of capital. If a perfectly competitive firm can acquire the services of as much capital as it wishes at a constant rental rate of R per year, it should employ capital up to the point at which the value of the marginal product of capital is equal to R. A machine produces no benefits now, but $200 in benefits at the end of a year. At the end of the year it falls apart into a heap of dust never to be used again. The present value of its income stream is approximately $182 if the interest rate is 10%. The efficient market hypothesis would lead to the conclusion that people who win big in the stock market are more lucky than smart. Suppose the purchase price for a fax machine is $900. If the market rate of interest is 0.04, annual maintenance expenses are 0.03, and physical and technological depreciation is 0.15, how much will the machine's annual rental cost be? $198. According to the text discussion of efficient capital markets, which of the following would a well-trained economist recognize as logical and expected? Monkeys throwing darts at a financial page can hit stocks that perform as well as stocks picked by financial experts. Suppose a machine generates $500 worth of revenue at the end of each of the next 3 years, at which time it can be sold to a salvage company for $350. If the annual rate of interest is 0.08, what is the maximum amount a business would pay for this machine if maintenance costs are $100 per year? $1,309. Which of the following 3 statements is true? I. The amount of capital equipment a firm wishes to buy depends on the rate of interest. 2. The amount of capital equipment a firm wishes to buy depends on the purchase price of capital. 3. The amount of capital equipment a firm wishes to buy depends on the rates of technological and physical depreciation. All 3 statements are true. Interest rates are determined by the Market supply and demand for loanable funds. According to the text, a rise in the interest rate may either raise or lower consumer savings. The quantity of loanable funds supplied by firms is positively related to the interest rate. In the market for loanable funds, an increase in the government budget deficit will increase the market rate of interest. If the nominal interest rate is 10% and the rate of inflation is 7%, what is the real rate of interest? 2.8%. Consider a perpetual bond that pays $200 per year to its owner. By how much would the price of this bond fall if the interest rate rose from 0.04 to 0.05? $1,000. In the loanable funds market, demand is downward sloping because lower interest rates make more capital projects profitable. Economists are strongly united in their belief that the stock market is efficient. According to the textbook, if a wave of pessimism caused stocks to become generally overvalued, the best investment strategy is to continue to diversify your investment portfolio. Economic rent is the difference between the payment actually received by the owner of a factor of production and her reservation price. In the diagram below, the economic rent is represented by Area B. Peak load pricing is designed to move consumers up along their demand curve. Many minor league ballplayers get called up to play in the majors and then get sent back down again to the minors. Jim makes $26,000 in the minors, and then when he gets called up, he makes $125,000, though he never plays and is an unknown name to the fans. It is most likely true that a portion of Jim's major league salary is economic rent. Peak load pricing helps firms gain profit because they can serve their customers with a smaller capital base. A for-profit company that buys real capital and leases it to a non-profit company can depreciate the leased capital to lower the firm's tax liability. Suppose Chase Bank owns a truck that it leases to Ryder Incorporated. The truck's value is $100,000 and it is expected to deteriorate at a rate of 5% per year. If the real interest rate is 2%, then Chase's total costs of owning the truck are $7,000. Suppose you are deciding how much oil to pump from your oil well in the next 2 years. Other things equal, you will be more likely to pump more oil this year than next year if you expect a higher price for oil this year than next year. Suppose you are deciding how much oil to pump from your oil well in the next 10 years. If you know oil would sell for $5 per gallon in 10 years and the real interest rate is about 4%, the present value of the opportunity cost of selling the oil today would be about $3.38. Risk premium is a payment differential necessary to compensate the investor for having to bear a risk. Consider a perpetual bond that pays $150 per year to its owner. What would be the price of the consol if the interest rate is 2%? $7,500. When a CEO gets $20 million a year in salary, is any of that considered rent? Because he would leave the company if he got less, none of the money is considered rent. Since the last recession, interest rates have been very low. Also, it is generally known that we are close to major breakthroughs in solar energy and battery storage technology. How would these two factors impact the price of oil today? The first factor will increase the current price of oil, and the second factor would tend to decrease oil prices today. Which of the following is considered financial capital? All of these are financial capital. Peter studies at the coffee shop around the corner. If both Peter and John could negotiate a settlement without transactions costs, how many phone calls would John end up making if he, John, had the rights to make any calls he liked at the coffee shop? The answer is 2. Peter studies at the coffee shop around the corner. If both Peter and John could negotiate a settlement without transactions costs, how many phone calls would John end up making if Peter had the rights to stop any cell phone calls from taking place at the coffee shop? The answer is 2. Peter studies at the coffee shop around the corner. According to the Coase theorem, when the parties affected by externalities can negotiate costlessly with one another, an efficient outcome results no matter how the law assigns responsibility. If the costs of negotiation are small but not negligible, the best available outcome results if the liability is placed on the party with the lowest cost of prevention. If a company dumps pollution in the water and fishermen are hurt, and if transactions costs are prohibitively high and efficiency is the most important criteria, liability should be placed on the group that has the least cost of solving the problem. Negative externality occurs when the production of a good harms third parties. An example of a positive externality is an apple orchard increasing the number of trees next to a bee farm. Suppose the problem is the stereo noise in the dorm. If negotiation costs are zero and you have the property rights to the airwaves, how loud will the music be played? The answer to the questions are to the nearest whole dial number. The answer is 6. Suppose the problem is the stereo noise in the dorm. If negotiation costs are zero and she has the property rights to the airwaves, how loud will the music be played? The answer is 6. Suppose the problem is the stereo noise in the dorm. What if negotiation is impossible and you have the rights to play? She will insulate her walls and you will play at 10. Suppose the problem is the stereo noise in the dorm. If she has the property rights with negotiation impossible, then what will the outcome be? You will play to 3 and insulate so that the noise does not reach her. Suppose fishermen go fishing at a fishery that has no property rights. If there were no controls over fishing, how many vessels would be sent out fishing? The answer is 8. Suppose fishermen go fishing at a fishery that has no property rights. If the fishery was owned collectively by all the fishermen, how many boats would be sent out fishing? The answer is 6. An example of a negative externality is pollution. If grazing land is used by all individuals on a free open range, they will operate until the AP of the land equals the opportunity cost of the input. According to Pigou, the best way to deal with a negative externality is to tax it. If transactions costs are very high and auctions for pollution permits are not possible, which of the following is the most effective way to deal with pollution? Tax pollution. Laws are efficient if they work to equate the marginal benefits and marginal costs of behavior. A positional externality occurs when one person's increase in consumption lowers his neighbor's utility. According to the text, if diamonds represent a form of conspicuous consumption, then they should be taxed. Given high transactions costs, the best way to deal with a positive externality is to subsidize it. The laws relating to trespass, the use of airspace and unobstructed view tell us what about property rights definition in the United States. Property laws involve all of these considerations. The story in your book about Austria and the nuclear power plants is a clear case of which of the following? Political differences can sometimes override rationality, raising negotiation costs and making solutions difficult or impossible. 15 alternative set. 1. A machine that stayed forever like new, never needed maintenance, and never was superseded by better technology would have a rental value equal to blank in a world with no inflation. The real interest rate. A machine produces no benefits now, but $100 in benefits next year. At the end of next year it falls apart into a heap of dust never to be used again. The present value of its income stream is approximately. Both B and C are correct. The real interest rate is the same as the nominal interest rate if inflation is 0. A bond that has a face value of $100 and an interest return of 5% will fall in value below $100 if the nominal interest rate increases. If the expected value of the income stream of two firms is identical at $500, but the possibility of big gains or big losses is present with the first firm only, all the above are true. The efficient market hypothesis would lead to the conclusion that people who win big in the stock market are more lucky than smart. The efficient market hypothesis suggests that real rates of return will be similar wherever an investment is made. Efficient financial markets lead to the conclusion that all of the above are true. A municipal tax-free bond is less attractive to a poor person than to a rich person. A good peak load pricing strategy should always reduce the optimal amount of capital stock required for your firm. Economic rent is a return that is described, at least in part, by all the above. I am indifferent between a taxable bond return of 5% and a municipal bond that returns only 4%. If the risks are the same and I am a rational investor, the tax rate on the taxable bond must be 20%. An office furniture manufacturer is closing shop at a furniture wholesaler's convention. Some of the inexpensive furniture is being dismantled for pickup by the garbage trucks. Then two people walk up and ask whether they can purchase a desk for use in their office. The furniture owner indicates that one can have it for $5. Both want it and would pay $5 for it, but the first one on the scene gets it for that price. We can say that the $5 payment is not economic rent from any point of view. Gene Conley was a 6'8" baseball pitcher who, many years ago, also played basketball for the Boston Celtics. He finally stayed with baseball because they paid him slightly more than the Celtics paid. Moses Malone came to pro basketball out of high school and made far more money than his parents ever expected their son to earn. If I insisted that most of Malone's income was economic rent and Conley's income contained almost no economic rent, I would be right if Malone had no other high-paying job to consider. The economics of non-renewable resources predicts that both B and C are correct. Recently, an advocate of electric cars told me that it would not take much extra electricity generating capacity to have many electric cars on the road. His explanation included one of the following arguments. Which argument is confirmed by this chapter in your text? Cars can be charged at night when electric demand is light, thus requiring little extra capital investment in electricity generation. It is time to harvest the tomato crop when the tomato's growth rate equals the real interest rate. Which of the following will raise the non-renewable resource stock exhaustion path? The resource owners expect that the anticipated new invention mentioned in A above will fail rather than succeed. 17. Alternative set. General equilibrium analysis broadens the horizon of analysis to include the interrelationships of all the previous chapters in the book. In the commodity space of a consumer's Edgeworth box, every point of tangency among indifference curves is considered efficient. Which statement is true about the Edgeworth box sketched below? A production possibility curve can be derived from this graph. All points on a production possibility curve imply that labor and capital are being used efficiently. Which statement is true? A system can be technically efficient but not fair. In a general equilibrium framework, the deadweight welfare loss of monopoly pricing behavior is smaller than it appears in partial equilibrium because the competitive markets adjust and offset some of the loss. In a consumer product Edgeworth box, a position on the contract curve is always Pareto optimal. A Pareto preferred transaction is one where no one loses and at least one person gains in the transaction. A Pareto optimal transaction in consumption is one where the consumers must have moved to the contract curve. The invisible hand of Adam Smith's markets could be restated in our terms by saying that competitive market equilibrium will be Pareto optimal. In the Edgeworth box shown below, there is more clothing demanded than is available. In the Edgeworth box shown above for question 9, the price for food is too high relative to the clothing price. in order to derive systematically the size of any single consumer goods Edgeworth box, we need to know either A or B because they both amount to the same information. If society is inside its production possibility frontier, it is also off the contract curve of the production Edgeworth box.s. If society can transform 2 units of food into 1 unit of clothing and citizens are willing to trade 1 unit of food for 1 unit of clothing, then the product mix in the economy is weighted too heavily toward clothing and should be shifted toward more food. In a perfectly competitive society, firms that profit maximize will produce where price is equal to marginal cost. This implies that all the above are true. If an economy trades internationally at world prices, it will generate greater utility for its people than if it had an efficient closed economy in which it ignored world markets, except in the rare case where its marginal rate of transformation was exactly equal to the ratio of world prices. Which of the following will improve efficiency in an economy? All the above improve efficiency. If marginal cost does not equal marginal benefit in all markets, the outcome cannot be Pareto optimal. Which of the following will not necessarily lead to such inefficiency? A tax imposed on a producer. Which of the following is true of the consumption Edgeworth box models of this chapter? If markets are free, the product prices will adjust to move consumers to the contract curve.